Brothers here. I'm Newman. Unusually, I'm not in this documentary. So, I'm a neutral voice on this. I'm here with Marcus Hearn, who also unusually for a Hammer Films documentary isn't in it, but made it.
So, I think I've got the face for radio.
Yeah. I assume if you're a Hammer fan, you'll already know who Marcus is. He's the official historian of Hammer Films, and as part of his duties, has created this very specific documentary about a very brief period in British cinema history. If you're a Hammer film fan, and I assume you've got to be, because otherwise you'd be seeing eyeball gouging. Nobody here wanted to see Bodied, right? It's the battle rap movie, which is pretty good. Catch it later. This is also about a period of the British film industry that is perhaps the dying end of the international years of the 1960s and early 70s. So, Marcus, take it away. How did this project come about?
Well, it wasn't my idea. It was the idea of the producers in America, Diabolique, who also have a magazine, and I think they basically felt the same way that I do about this material. Because aside from my professional work with Hammer, I'm also a fan, and like many fans, I'm a completist. And there was a gap on my shelf, on my Blu-ray shelf, which was basically ran from 1968 to 1974, which is the Warner Brothers years. As I'm sure a lot of you know, Hammer did not distribute many of their own films. Their films were distributed by Warner Brothers, Columbia, Universal, etc., Paramount, etc. And as Kim has pointed out, from 1968 to 74, it was their last lifeline, really, to American distribution, was the sponsorship of Warner Brothers films. And so Warner sponsored their biggest films from 68 to 74. Which it was great. They got the films in front of a lot of eyeballs, as Joe Dante says in the documentary. But one of the consequences of that was that, of course, Warner Bros. Retained the rights to those films, and I think a lot of fans were frustrated that Warner Bros. Had been maybe slower than some of the other majors in actually releasing these films on Blu-ray. And when they did eventually appear, I mean, I think there was some sort of fan petition in America actually to actually get them released, and so everyone was thankful that things like Taste of Blood of Dracula, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, AD 72, etc. were finally coming out. But then this was very quickly followed by frustration that when the discs did come out, they were lovely, they didn't have any special features on them. And so Dima Balin, who produced this film, basically said, well, why don't we make our own? And so what you're about to see is a
rogue
sort of
special feature.
Is a sort of feature special feature dealing with this, what I think is a very important period in the company's history.
So, which of these films is your favourite?
From this period? Well, that's a question, isn't it? I think Taste of Blood of Dracula, for my money, is probably the best of all the Dracula sequels. I think slightly controversial, I know. There's a strong case for saying Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Could well be the best of the Frankenstein sequels.
I would agree with both of those.
And even when the films aren't great, they're a whole lot of fun. I mean, Dracula AD 1972 is not a classic by anyone's estimation.
I think
it's a great film.
We have all warmed up to that again. I mean, it's a film I loved when I saw it in AD 1973 when it was actually released. Double bill with Trog. I loved it, and then I remember watching it a couple of years later and thinking this is actually terrible. And then I warmed up to it. Now it is perhaps my favourite of the Hammer Dracula films, even though I recognise it's a long way off being even in the top three, isn't it? But
Christopher Lee's good.
Christopher Lee's good.
Christopher Lee's always good.
Everybody is good in it.
Everybody.
Yeah, is good, I mean, all the way down to Marshall Hunt is good in it.
But
Stomping Ground are good in it.
One thing I wanted to do with this was to try to put. I mean, obviously Hammer had some very tough times from 1970 onwards. I mean, the company survived throughout the 70s and survives to this day, in fact. But there was, nobody could deny that there was, of course, there was a decline in the company's fortunes throughout the 1970s. And from my point of view, I wanted to put this into some kind of context, because I think so many lazy historians and critics have basically said in the past that it was just a case that Hammer couldn't change with the times, and you only have to look at films like AD 72 as evidence of the fact that they were struggling to change with the times. They were too slow to change with the times. But I like to, this film makes the point that Hammer were trying just about everything they could. Okay, they didn't anticipate The Exorcist. That was very unfortunate for them. But they did pretty much everything else to stay in the game in the early 70s, including the last Warner Brothers film, which is the Kung Fu one, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. And so I hope, I think Hammer fans, enthusiasts who watch this film, if they come away with one thing, I hope it's an understanding that it wasn't just a case of Hammer being done in by The Exorcist. There were a number of other reasons that were actually beyond their control, which led to their demise, temporary as it was, in 1979. And this basically tells that story.
And all the other Hammer documentaries, as it were, the ones that deal with Bray Studios and the classics of the 50s, they make an emphasis on the family nature of Hammer. And this is the period where the family is breaking up, isn't it? I mean,
it's fragmenting. It's fragmenting.
Literally in a sense that the extended family they had earlier in their development, the technicians and the actors are sort of drifted away. But also just that the Carreras family are not speaking to each other or are at loggerheads about the way the company is going, and essentially break up. Do you think that's one of the reasons why there isn't sort of a general fondness for this period among the creatives, because they don't remember it very fondly as a great time personally, in the way that they all remember the beginning as wonderful and friendly and creative? Here it seems what everybody remembers is the arguments.
I think that Bray contributed a lot to that sort of legendary atmosphere. Bray was a wonderful facility. Everybody who worked there seemed to love it. It was revered because, aside from anything else, it was a studio where you only made one film at a time. So that's how everybody got to know each other. But Hammer had to leave Bray. I mean, I think you look at the later films, especially things like The Mummy's Shroud and Plague of the Zombies and The Reptile, and Bray is straining at the seams, really. Hammer has to get bigger.
They couldn't have made Quatermass and the Pit.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. And doesn't that film benefit from being shot at MGM? It really does, with a huge backlot. And so there were other reasons why they had to leave Bray, but I think there were also important creative reasons why they had to leave Bray, which people don't really discuss that much. And of course, they moved to Elstree principally, which is a wonderful studio, but it's a factory compared to Bray. But I think this was something that probably had to happen. And I think also the change of personnel that went along with that probably also had to happen, because the films had to change. And this goes back to my earlier point about this idea that Hammer were kind of stuck in some sort of creative rut. They were stuck with Jack Asher, they were stuck with Terence Fisher or James Bernard or whatever. It wasn't the case at all. And as the film, I think, hopefully shows, they tried everything and almost anyone to stay in the game, which I think was the right thing for them to do. And I think one of the people that emerges from this, I hope, as something of a hero, is Michael Carreras, who did come back to the company despite the fact he had a very poor relationship with his father, because he, I think, more than anybody else, really wanted to keep Hammer alive. And he was the guy who was driving this experimentation, trying to keep the Warner Brothers deal alive, trying to keep them in the game, trying to keep the name alive. I think he's, to me, he's something of a hero.
And one thing you don't cover in this is that about this time, Hammer's greatest success was On the Buses and a little blip of kind of British domestic TV comedy type thing. Do you want to do a documentary about that period? Well, again, you may hate those films or have an ambiguous relationship, but it's a really interesting period in cinema.
Interesting period, yes. I mean, Warner Brothers were not, it doesn't really come under the remit of this film, because Warner Brothers were only interested in what they considered to be international subjects. And as we'll learn, from 1970 onwards, when Warner Brothers was, post Jack Warner, once the Kinney Corporation have taken over, Warner's definition of international subjects only really extends to something that A, got Dracula in it, B, got Christopher Lee playing Dracula. So Reg Varney's not really on there.
Tragedy. If only you could see the other direction it could have gone.
And but I mean, it was a big success in the UK on the buses, of course. and it did keep Hammer going for a while. It enabled them to make more experimental sort of horror films as well. But I think this is part of the problem. The company was being pulled in different directions. You know, on the one hand, you got on the buses, you make a lot of money, etc. in the UK, but you still need to get films into America. You know, you still have to get films in American cinemas, and that landscape, climate, becomes extremely hostile from 1970 onwards, as we'll see.
One of the things I find interesting about this is films that disappointed commercially at the time now look ahead of their times. Things like Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires or Captain Kronos, which are horror movies that are also action pictures. That didn't really happen until, you know, Blade or Underworld in the late 90s. And then people realized, actually, no, that's a really great combination of horror and action. But at the time, it seemed not to connect with audiences.
And yet, Hammer still has this reputation that dogs it of being creatively stagnant in the early 1970s. Kronos and Seven Golden Vampires are not the work of a company that's run out of ideas. They may not be the right ideas. A company that's run out of ideas.
And did you get to meet anybody on this that you'd been waiting to interview all your life?
Peter Sasdy. Peter Sasdy, who directed Taste the Blood of Dracula, is wonderful. You're going to be seeing John Carson as well, in what proves to be sadly his final screen appearance.
It is one of the things about documentaries like this is the end credits are always a bit melancholy, aren't they? Because they're always dedicated to people who are no longer with us.
Well, this is part of the thing, really. I mean, you asked me why I wanted to do this right at the top of this conversation. I wanted to do it because this whole project, I mean, the whole thing, everything that we do is a race against time, really.
And I've always been a great believer of talk to people while they're around.
Absolutely.
So, any final remarks before we show this thing?
Well, I hope you enjoy it. It's been the first time I've seen it.
Oh, right.
Since I delivered it last year.
Because it's been in the works for a long time.
We started, I think, 2016. I delivered it last summer. I never imagined for a moment that it would be seen on a screen this size.
Oh, right.
So,
do you want to go back and remaster it quickly? Take a bit of the grey now. I think you can see the boom mic in a couple of the
all that stuff. I just, you know, it was a labour of love for me, and it was a labour of love for everybody who made it. And I really hope you enjoy it.